Welcome to the All About Ability podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Kyle Financial and Strathclyde House Buyers. Kyle Financial are proud supporters of local communities and specialise in helping you protect what matters most. For your family, your lifestyle and even your income, they have it covered. Kyle Financial are now offering free wills, regardless of whether or not you need any other service. Go check them out on their website, www.kyle-financial.co.uk, or check them out on Facebook, Twitter or even Instagram. Strathclyde House Buyers are a local property solutions company who specialise in helping people sell their property quickly with no fees. If you or anyone you know are looking for a fast, stress-free sale, check them out on their website, www.strathclydehousebuyers.com, on Facebook or on Instagram. Well, we get Scottish rapper and author Darren Mcgarvey the other day, so it's a pleasure to have you in.
Oh no, thanks for the invitation. Glad we managed to get it all sorted out.
And you've been working on a few, you've done a lot of things, right? And we could go over, I'm sure we'll touch on them, but you've been working on a couple of new things with your music and a new book.
Yeah, I've been working on my second book for about nearly 3 years. Although the concept really began to crystallise properly during the pandemic, when this idea of social distance sort of reminded me that what I tend to write about is this issue of proximity, in a social sense. So the distance between social classes and the experiences that happen on either side of a class divide as a result of inequality. So middle class people's experience of school was different from working class or poorer people's experience of school and so on. So then that really kind of gave me a sense of direction with the book. So I'm in the final stages of that. I'm in the final stages of writing my new album. And obviously the restrictions are loosening and things are kind of moving back to some semblance of normality. So for me, I feel the pressure lifting. I don't know what everybody else's experience is, and I know it's all relative, but we definitely had some tough moments in our household over the last 18 months. Yeah.
No, I think a lot of people in the same boat as that. I definitely have, and it's nice to see it starting to get back to a wee bit of normality, even though I don't like using that word usually. But
yeah, it is. I think for me, and maybe other people feel the same. I mean, obviously, it must be different for people who have experienced extreme adversity or long-term illness or deaths during this. So I always try to keep them firmly in mind when I'm kind of talking about my own experience. But I think for a lot of people, then there's a sense of gratitude. Because there's a lot of things that you took for granted, being able to go for a coffee and have a solitary moment, For me anyway, that's dead important. And when I was unable to do that, it drove me crazy for a while until I got to a place of acceptance about it. And here we are emerging out the other side. So fingers crossed, things keep on this trajectory.
Did that journey through that make it difficult to write the book during that time?
Yes. Yes, and writing a book is difficult, right? I mean, I always feel like I need to qualify saying things are hard, right? Because I know what real hardship is, But like I said about COVID, everything's kind of relative, isn't it?
Of course.
So writing a book is a struggle and it is a solitary existence as a writer. And you need that solitude because you need quiet to think.
Yeah.
And to write and to formulate your thoughts and structure your ideas and read what you're writing and absorb things. And so in a pandemic where everyone's at home, I have two beautiful, healthy young children who are at that age where, they're not very independent. My son was 4 during the pandemic, my daughter was 2. And so I got to a point where I realised I had to explain to my publisher and other people who I was obligated to in terms of work that I was meant to produce. I had to say, listen, I need to completely change the whole way that I work. I need to change my whole attitude towards what I consider productive. Because if I have this attitude or this core belief that I need a certain circumstance in order to produce work, I'm never going to get anything done. So I just let them know, this will be finished when it's finished. and I have to develop a new way of working and a new attitude to productivity, because it got to a point where if I'm working, I can't be in dad mode. You know what I mean? There's just something that means these two sides of my nature are segregated. I can't blend them. So when I'm at home with kids in the house, then I'm dad, and I can't be getting ratty with the children. I mean, it's nippy enough being a child of mine, right? It's hard enough, right? Because I'm a child, you know what I mean? So it's hard enough, never mind me also trying to have an open word document and this and that. So once I kind of got over that hurdle in my mind, the pressure lifted, and then actually I became more productive because I cherished the moments of solitude that I did get more, so I did more in that time. So I ended up writing a lot of new content that I hadn't foreseen during the pandemic, which was kind of paradoxical, but again, it shows you the power of a belief. If you have a false belief, you create an obstacle for yourself sometimes, and just kind of like setting that aside creates a bit of space.
It's interesting that you say about the thought of needing a certain way of having the things set out to do the work, because I think a lot of people have had that same issue of you're really used to your own routine. Like for me, I was getting up at the gym, go to the gym twice a day, feeling good, saunas, swimming all the time, and then all of a sudden it's all away, and your whole thing is different. And I was very much stuck. So it's interesting hearing you say that, because I was very much stuck in that same sort of, I need this routine to get things done, and then I ended up having a period of months where nothing was getting done, you know?
Yeah, I'm all about structure and routine in my daily life. Not everyone is that way inclined. So there has to be, especially in relationships or in a household where you have different personality types and people have different demands on their daily life. You have to be tolerant of other people's attitudes towards things. But I find structure allows me to have a sense of direction, a sense of security. I am open to new experiences, more so now than I've ever been, partly because my wife is very open to new experiences as part of her nature. She's very spontaneous. These are all very good qualities. So it's getting a balance. Because if I'm being spontaneous all the time, I'm not getting the things that I need done, and then they begin to pile up on me. And for me, structure also is essential for raising children. You know, children need a certain amount of sleep. It's not negotiable like adults. They can't just power through 5 cups of coffee, you know, or smoke themselves to death like I seem to be doing. But so the routine for children is important because this helps them to emotionally regulate themselves, but it also is important for them to know what to expect, you know, what the boundaries are. And also this is good for parents as well, because I like to know what time does my day end, you know, what point do I have any free time at the end of the day? What will I do with that free time? Will I go to the gym? So on and so forth. So yeah, there was a novelty in the beginning of lockdown for us anyway. We were financially secure, so we didn't have that immediate acute anxiety about what is going to happen in terms of providing for ourselves. So for me, the novelty was the sun came out, we have a big garden, Becky was out building things in the garden, kids were out, I put my PlayStation on for the first time in years, started getting, you know, Last of Us 2 came out, Final Fantasy 7 Remake came out. Before I knew it, I was just like mad about PlayStation. I kind of went into this wee zone when I was like, all right, I'm playing, this is me, I play, I like to play. And but then obviously that was when we thought this is only going to last for a few weeks, you know. Boris will get on top of this, and then the next thing, you know, he's in intensive care, and suddenly you're like, oh shit, right, okay, better get some new games. Do you know what I mean? Strap myself in.
Oh man, that's exactly it. I mean, it comes down to, it gives you time to look at new things and maybe change and have an idea of, like you said, gratitude. Gratitude's been a big part of this pandemic for me as well. But see the actual process of having to continue the work and like even the grind of having to write this book through at this time as well, while dealing with kids in a circumstance that you probably wouldn't have expected to in any other time, you know what I mean? There was no scenario where you thought, I'm going to be with the kids much more than I would have been in maybe regular life pre-pandemic.
Yeah, and also considering the fact that, you know, my wife very graciously, when a lot of opportunities began to present themselves for me after the publication of my first book, you know, the TV work, the public speaking gigs, I was really being pulled in many different directions across the country all the time. I think one day I did, you know, I was in Cardiff, then Birmingham, then a flight to Edinburgh for an event in Edinburgh, then back to Glasgow, then back to Kilbride in one day, right? That's madness, right?
That is madness.
And so so Becky was at home, my second child was born, she was very young. And, you know, because we were financially comfortable, it was sort of, it made sense to adopt that traditional configuration at that moment because the opportunities were coming in my direction. But we had always agreed, you know, that once things balanced out, then we would kind of circle back round and make sure that she received the same level of support in terms of trying to further her own career, because she's an artist, she's a writer, she's a university lecturer, she's got a master's degree in songwriting, she's, you know. So the pandemic was great for kind of balancing things at home in terms of the division of labour where childcare and domestic tasks are concerned. And so she in a sense kind of thrived during this, which helped to offset some of the difficulties that I was experiencing, because I began to feel something that was missing in my life when I was busy all the time, which was that I wasn't contributing enough at home. I was contributing enough materially, and when I was home I was doing stuff, but I would always be away for, you know, a certain period of time that when I returned home I would feel like I wasn't in the rhythm of the household. You know, I think a lot of dads will understand what I mean. You come back and you realise everyone is getting on with it, and that there's not actually a great loss that you're not there in terms of managing a household. Emotionally there's a loss, particularly for the children. So when you come back you feel like a bit of a third wheel. So I started to understand how a lot of dads throw themselves into their work because they come home, they feel awkward, you know. It might be a bit of a frosty atmosphere with the missus.
Yeah.
And the kids, you know, my son used to sit with his back to me. I remember one time he sat with his back to me in the bath. So I'm sitting on the toilet just chatting away to him, and he's in a bath and he just sat with his back to me. And it was very clear that this was a kind of protest, you know. Don't think you can just come back in here after being away here, there and everywhere and just initiate a relationship, you know. You're back to square one with me. Get on the flare and play with me, you know what I mean? Read me a story, blah, blah, blah. So that was kind of, there was a lot of learning and growth and being home and really like fully inhabiting this role of a father in the sense that I had always envisioned that I could, which was not necessarily trying to be their best mate, you know, having to be the dad and say, no, it's 11 o'clock at night, you can't have a nice lolly. Do you know what I mean? And I'm sorry if that makes you cry, but it's all right to cry. I'll give you a cuddle, but get to your bed, you wee shite. You know? And that's been one of the many positive aspects of it that came through it.
It's a blessing really that this all happened as well at a time where they're at an age where you can still come in and do that. They're so young that, you know, you could have, in that scenario, if they're 15, 16, you're probably, you know, you've missed your opportunity there in a way.
Absolutely, and you know, it also gave me an additional appreciation of my own father, which you'll hear a lot of people talking about when they have kids, you know, appreciating the difficulties that their parents faced and raising children. My dad was a single parent as well, you know, so I find actually this has been a period of real growth for me in developing more self-awareness about what are my limitations, what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses. I mean, even just the process of editing a book, right? So a lot of the book was written a couple of years back when I had a whole different idea of the book. Now, a book's a book, and a lot of people don't have the chance to do that, so they might not think that they understand what I mean. But handing over a manuscript of a book, a very rough, poorly structured manuscript of a book to other people to read is a bit like handing someone a picture of a very intimate photograph of yourself. You're revealing something about yourself that you don't want anybody else to see. You're revealing all of your vulnerabilities. You're revealing all of your assumption. You're revealing all of your deficiencies as a writer, sometimes even as a person. You're revealing your grandiosity, your fury, and you're really revealing that you need a lot of help to finish the book, you know. And there was a moment where I realised that one of the reasons I had sat working on the book for so long and hadn't asked the publisher for help, so I'm a big publisher, right? So there's a lot of help there if I want it. And it was just total solitude the whole time. And then I realised once I'd handed it over, there was a weight lifted, because I was trying to hand them over like what I thought was going to be like The Godfather Part 2 of social political poverty porn, right? That's what I thought, you know, and I think that's a good thing to shoot for, right?
Yeah.
Like Godfather Part 2 is a good thing to shoot for in terms of doing your kind of sophomore project. You're trying to expand on the themes, but you're trying to bring in some new characters. You want the sense of scale to increase, and you want to show more a range of what you can do. So it's a good thing to shoot for. But the thing is, I was kind of reticent to hand it over for them to give me feedback until it had took that sort of shape. So it became an unrealistic expectation. When I handed it over, then it just took a big weight off me. And one of the big things I learned was the insecurity that courses through me, second guessing. I mean, about 25,000 words in that manuscript was just me going round in circles, qualifying things, because I'm frightened that a middle class academic's just going to fucking put a red pen through it. You know what I mean? And it was just like so insecure and having a lot to say, but being very frightened to say it.
And that's interesting because it's right after, you know, the success of the first book as well, and you've obviously, so you've proved yourself, but the insecurity is still there, and you still feel the need to produce this top tier level. But something I wanted to talk to you about was, I've noticed for myself that when I'm struggling with things and it's not going the way I want it to go, and it's not going to plan, and I'm in my head not feeling very good about myself, or the insecurities are coming out and things like that, I having to keep things going. So, for example, the podcast is something that I started during lockdown. It's something I've always wanted to do. I had reasons to do it because I was on this program called the Football for All Leadership program that was to make disabled people more employable. And so I came up with this idea. But all of a sudden, you know, anything that I've struggled, I've never had to keep things going. I've always been able to just let everything fall to the wayside and go right to rock bottom and then figure out what I'm doing next. Whereas when I've struggled through this period of time, for example, the last month or so, I would say it's probably fair to say that I've regressed in terms of how I see myself, and also just from a physical and mental standpoint, which is something obviously isn't easy to admit, but that's just it's the case. It's truth.
Yeah.
And so when you're going through that period of time, actually realising that, hold on a minute, I'm still at this podcast I've coming out every week and people are listening to it and I'm really enjoying doing it. But I'm having to keep this going while struggling with what's going on with me, and that's something that's been really new for me. And I was just wondering, like, do you find it difficult to actually maintain doing those when you're going through like a time like that, having to keep the you know the must do type of things,
consistency,
the consistency going.
Yeah, well, one of the blessings of having children is that unless you're dealing with like a serious addiction or something, you know, where your whole sense of choice and obligation goes out the window because you're a slave to the addiction till you deal with it, then with children and having that responsibility, first of all, you don't come first anymore, or when you do, it's just little kind of like it's little spells of you coming first. If you go away to work, or you have a kind of date night, or a wee holiday or whatever. So you have to be consistent for your children because there's baseline things that need to be done every day. You're running a house, the kids need to be clean, they need to be fed, they need to have activities, they need stimulation, you know. Sometimes that stimulation is just a Disney Plus subscription. Sometimes that stimulation is going out on a big day out or whatever. But there has to be something there. So in that sense, every day you're still getting things done. But then what suffers when you have these downtimes like you describe are the other things that actually help you to attack your baseline responsibilities more effectively. So rest, trying to eat well, and I don't mean following a pure strict clean diet. I just mean, you know, having a healthy attitude and a reasonable attitude towards what you should eat sometimes and what you shouldn't eat sometimes. And then also for me, a big thing that's came into my life, particularly in the last couple of years, is fitness. Like, I didn't realise that I actually love going to the gym, lifting weights, learning about nutrition, understanding my physiology, seeing changes and progress, figuring out how to deal with injuries and setbacks, and realising there's a real science to it, which is quite analogous to my recovery life, which is, you know, in recovery, progress happens at the painful bit, you know? It's through pain that you actually realise that you're growing, and that's a parallel directly to lifting a heavy weight. You know, you push yourself through a pain barrier, and then there's all sorts of other, you could be really on the nose with the analogy, because I don't really know what calories are, right? I don't know what they are. I just know if I eat more calories than I burn off, I gain weight, and if I eat less, I lose weight, right? I don't know why that happens. I don't know how it happens. And it's the same with recovery, you know. If I go to my meetings, I tend to stay sober. I don't know why. Don't really care. If I just do what I'm told and follow a programme and stop diet hopping, you know, between different fads and this, that and the next thing, then I see progress. And so for me, consistency, it's not just about hitting your mark, but it's about acquiring a certain emotional tolerance for yourself when you aren't making the mark. Because we can make downtime worse by then becoming kind of self-hating, you know, and berating ourselves in the negative self-talk and these false beliefs then that we acquire that create more obstacles for us. But it is tough. And I think, to be honest, if you look at any kind of spiritual teachings, you know, for the ancient world, and even maybe further back, a lot of these principles were devised. Human beings have been dealing with the same fundamental problems, the same battle with self, for thousands of years, and in that sense we should see our kind of problems in some kind of galactic perspective.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting how these things can just sort of creep in slowly. Like even when you feel like there's been plenty of times where you can feel like you're past it and you're doing well, and all of a sudden, like you say, those maybe you don't sleep as well, or you skip a meeting, or you don't go to the gym, and it's interesting how a lot of it is momentum. A lot of it's momentum and keeping it going that way and seeing the progress. Yeah. And then when you start to let that slip, the thing that I've noticed as well is it's the idea that the self-talk does come into it, and your actual perception of yourself gets lower. So then all those things become less, and then you end up back at a kind of similar place to where you were before, and you're sitting thinking, how am I here again? How did this happen? I was doing so well. What went wrong? Yeah. When, you know, and people want to, I think in my head, and a lot of people says, they want to say it's this big complicated thing where, if all this went this way or whatever. Whereas, and it comes back to what you said, it's more about actually looking at what are the things that are keeping you going in the right direction. Go to the meetings, go to the gym, eating right. Yep. And it's such a basic, in a lot of ways for people listening to this, like, this is the most, you know, in terms of, everyone says this, but it's actually looking at yourself and going, what is it that works for me as an individual? Because like you said, throughout all of our human history, we've all felt the same sort of emotions, but we all deal with them in different ways. Yeah, and also at whatever point in history we happen to be born, there are a whole different array of pressures, challenges, social norms, and stress management solutions available. You know, so we live at a time just now where if you just looked at it, you would think we have less cause to be stressed out than ever before, because so much of our life is facilitated on our behalf by technology, and
a lot of the, we were watching Outlander with my wife recently, and it's the thing that sometimes really sticks out to me is how long it took to get news anywhere back then. Like you're talking about, there's a scene where it's like, the king's coming up from London and they've got 4 days to get their shit together. Do you know what I mean? It's like, now imagine the king comes up, he gets a bit of information, it's dead important, and it takes 4 days to get that information back to London. And just that whole process. Whereas the day I wouldn't be able to go outside my house without the phone to tell me where this place is. Do you know what I mean? But people could walk for hundreds of miles on the horses and just fucking find it. Oh, here's Cleveland Street. Do you know what I mean? So it's interesting because I do believe there are significant and specific stresses that are placed on the human mind and the human body, which have specific context in this current time and economic system that we're in. But I also genuinely do feel, and a lot of kind of my friends on the left might think this is a bit of a cop-out, but I do feel that any kind of serious criticism of the economic system, of capitalism, has to be couched in that understanding as well, that a lot of people's experience of this society is a positive one generally, in terms of what they want to do with their life, what they want to do with their time, the money that they make, how they want to spend their money. And also a lot of people recognise as well that you would rather be born today than 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 500 years ago. I certainly would. And so it's like, it's always trying to find that gratitude in there, even where there are legitimate gripes or grievances or criticisms, because not only do we live in a time of modernity and convenience, obviously massive inequality and corruption, but also we live in a time where, like, if we want to change the society, we can fucking do something about it,
Well, it's so easy to get caught up in the here and now, especially with the way they were watching social media and things like that. And you're saying, like, 50 years ago, I would be sitting in this chair anyway, so from my point of view, it wasn't, wheelchairs are barely acceptable now, never mind 50 years ago. So there's a lot that has changed for the better, but like you say, we're still, I think the pandemic specifically has kind of shown the gap between, the poor and the rich in a way. I seen a stat recently actually that showed how much billionaires, like I've gotten a certain percentage richer and the poor people have gotten a certain percentage poorer.
Yeah.
And I think as we're going on, we're going to see this issue become more and more prevalent.
Yeah.
Even though it seems like it can't get any worse, but everything can always get worse.
Yeah. But billionaires increased their wealth by 35% throughout the pandemic.
That's a number.
And food bank use increased 37%. So that's a damning statistic.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, you somebody who's a real kind of like stickler for detail would be like, well, you have to demonstrate the linearity in that correlation. It's like, no, I don't have to. It's kind of self-evident, isn't it? Like, billionaires increased their wealth by 35%, right? And people who can't afford to eat, that's increased. It's pretty obvious. I mean, in our society, there's not necessarily a catch-all solution to any problem. It's always a trade-off, And unfortunately, the kind of trade-off that we have just now is everything's tipped in favour of people who already have assets, who already have property, who already have a foothold in the free market in somewhere and invested in the status quo. And so there's this constant tension between those who want to act to preserve the system as it is and those who experience the sharper effects of the inequality. And I mean that's a debate that's been going on for a long time. I think the one positive thing about a crisis is that it renders the society's problems so undeniably that only a profoundly unserious person would continue in the nonsense that our society doesn't have to change. It's obvious.
Yeah.
In the poorer communities, the uptake for infections was higher, the risk to everyone of death was higher. And also then you had all the working class people basically out every day keeping our society running, while half of society moved on to fucking Zoom and were brought gin and sex toys and bread for 18 months by people who are now dead, you know, because there wasn't adequate health services to keep them alive. So it's pretty undeniable. How do we move forward? I don't know. It tends to be the case. Governments need to be under constant pressure from very organised sections of the population until they actually feel that the cost of not changing the society is more than changing it, and that's how society evolves.
Well, not to get too much into politics here, but see with that last bit you said there about how, you know, a lot of the change needs to come from groups that are really organised and work together. Do you think that's where the likes of Boris and Trump and that have got success? Because it would seem like the plan is always to sort of divide and conquer, in the sense of everybody's, in my lifetime anyway, from what I know about politics, I don't have an in-depth, you know, knowledge of politics and how it all works and all that, but I would say that in my lifetime, it would seem that it's more divided than it's ever been before, in terms of everyone's very tribal with what they think about what should happen and what shouldn't, to the point where it seems like they've been able to pit us against each other to the point where we're not working together to fit against the actual real issues.
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare at any point in history where a whole society will unite simultaneously in the face of a threat or an enemy. Usually the only things that produce that sort of temporary solidarity and harmony are wars, you know, where, like, you know, and I mean like a war where you're getting bombed, you know, no the sort of wars we hear about in the news now, they're all happening over there. So it's usually just that when people get together and they're highly organised, then they understand the dynamics, you know, So it's interesting, there's this kind of idea about the left as being like all about trigger warnings and safe spaces and try to cancel everybody, and while that definitely is a feature online, it's a product of social media almost. That I don't recognise that as the left, you know. And in this community right now, there are left-wing activists who are working class, engaged in campaigns and organising in order to help people in this community with the poor paying conditions that they experience, the 0 hours contracts, whatever kind of disputes they're in with their employer, the threats of factories to up and leave and move somewhere else. There are anti-racist campaigners, there are disability campaigners, there are people organising all sorts of things. And while they believe what they're doing is moral, they don't moralise in the same way as people do on social media, because they're putting more on the line than their opinion, you know. So they're very strategic about how they act. You know, they're very strategic. They understand it's a numbers game. They understand if you can get enough people to group together in a collective bargain with an authority, a power, a boss or whatever, then you can bring them to heel in some way. And that's it. You know, for a lot of left-wing people, that's basically it. And so it's just like, I know that's a kind of diversion a wee bit, but the truth is, a lot of people like to pretend that society's problems and, you know, and history has developed through civil debate and discussion and careful processes of argumentation, and it's not true. The world changes, society changes. You get your rights, I get my rights. He gets his rights, whatever rights apply to us in our specific situations, because people fight for them and sacrifice their freedom for them and sometimes die for them. That's how people get their rights. And so sometimes, you know, a lot of left-wing people, they get a lot of flack because they always seem antagonistic and they're always trying to tear down the system, and they have placards and they chant, and it can be a bit cringy sometimes, and sometimes they're a bit annoying because they're always agitating us with their calls to action. But the truth is, you wouldn't have a lunch break, you wouldn't have a weekend, you wouldn't have the National Health Service without people who were willing to do that, you know, and be sneered at by people who would later enjoy those freedoms.
It's an excellent point, mate. Really is spot on. Like, I'm listening to it and I'm like, wow, that's keep talking. But something that's really quite interesting about you though is, you know, when I first looked you up and heard about you and me and Paul spoke about you, I knew you as Loki, the Scottish rapper.
Yep.
And so when I followed you on Twitter and was looking you up and reading more about you, I wasn't expecting this sort of perspective. I guess I thought Scottish rapper is it's just not what you would expect.
Yep.
This conversation about how in depth this short conversation has been so far, and so it's interesting to me how did you end up so in all these different areas?
Good question. I mean, the hip hop scene, the rap community in Scotland, and just the hip hop culture generally, was something that I became interested in my kind of later teens. But before that, I was interested in art, I was interested in music, I was interested in drama, theatre. I studied theatre at school, I have an advanced higher in drama. So that was kind of the direction that I was hoping to go. And then life gets in the way, adversity at home, I became homeless. And so that plan was out the window, because while everybody was going to the conservatoire, I was living in a supported accommodation in Maryhill, with a drug problem and an alcohol problem and an isolation problem. But luckily I kind of fell in love with rap and it gave me something to focus on. And I detached from my identity that I had created or that had been ascribed to me in Pollock, as a person from Pollock and blah, 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 blah. And when I took on this Loki name, it gave me a chance to create something that was a wee bit more of an expression of who I really was. Because when you grow up in a housing scheme, you very much feel the pressure, and formal as it is, to adopt a specific range of social presentations. So here's what you wear, here's how you talk, here's when you talk, here's the words you use when you talk. Anything that operates outside of that and you get accused of being gay. Do you know what I mean? Like that's how we thought back then. Do you know what I mean? And people will say that without even really knowing what gay means. It's just a word people throw around. What you read, that's gay. What you're into music, that's gay. You play trumpet, that's gay. And it's just like, you're the one using the gay word so much. Do you know what I mean? And really, you're the one that's afraid. You're the one that's afraid to be who you are. You're the one that comes to school every day and talks about Fenians and Tegs and Huns, and this is your chat all the time. And so I was always getting into conflict in Pollock because there was a part of me that just couldn't accept that that was what was expected of me. And so this would bring me into constant kind of altercations or interactions that were quite, I found quite threatening. And sometimes you have to defend yourself. The good thing for me about leaving Pollock was if I hadn't got out of Pollock when I did, I don't think I might have never got out, because if I had started drinking in Pollock the way I did when I got out of Pollock, I would never have got out of Pollock. You know what I mean? That's the truth. I'd have been in the Pines, I'd have been in the Pollock Inn, trading war stories about my granda who spent his life drinking in these places. You know what I mean? Like a lot of people do, and that's cool, but that wasn't for me. So hip hop really I gave myself permission to be who I really was, and that was, an artist, a creative force, and everything that I have now really comes from a lot of the cultural capital that I generated as a rapper. You know what I mean? And it's still my first love. I still wake up every day and I've got to get the lyrics down, and just bought a few beats yesterday and getting this album to the finish line, so I'm still dead passionate about it.
Well, I mean, the whole story just shows you that if you follow who you are, you'll find what's for you.
Aye, what's hard though, because I was lucky in the sense that my dad was dead supportive and encouraging. He wasn't one of these dads that's like talking about acting, do you know what I mean? Get a fucking job, wee man, do you know what I mean? He was saying to me, don't take the first job that comes along, do what you want to do. You're a writer. It was him that introduced me to rap music, because he could see that I was writing in a form that was consistent with a rap structure. So he was like, watch this video. This is called The Message. Do you know what I mean? And then we had MTV and MTV Base, and they still showed music videos at that time. It wasn't just reality TV. So you were getting on MTV Base at a certain time of day, certain time of night, you're getting Wu-Tang Clan, Gangster. Then obviously Eminem came onto the scene and blew up, and then that sort of like solidified for me that I had a place in the culture, because a lot of the themes in his music were resonating with me because I had similar experiences. So then I just kind of took that and ran with it, you know, and had a significant impact in Scottish hip hop culture. With no internet access, no income, no backup, no crew. My crew all came later. But I came into the hip hop scene pretty much with one mentor, Big Div, Guy from Paisley, and he just kind of set me off loose, you know. And my CDs were burnt all over the place, and fucking Ayrshire, Aberdeen, Edinburgh, they were being exchanged. Do you know what I mean? Like, and it's mad because I don't, rappers these days, they wouldn't need to do that. You know, they have access to technology, but back then the technology existed. I just didn't have access to it because I was literally poor, you know.
Yeah. But it's such a, you know, for inspiring story, and a lot of ways to come from that situation to claw your way out of it. But what you touched on there about how important it was, your dad, and having people, just having someone that was pushing you like that, and how, you know, you spoke about how if you had drank outside a Pollock, you wouldn't have got a Pollock. And how many people in that situation that had the dad that wasn't like that stayed in Pollock and were just alcoholics and addicted to things their whole life. It just shows you how much the culture and the class can impact somebody's outcome of their life.
Yeah, and I think it's cool as well. I mean, a lot, it depends on the different attitudes around the family and the values of a household. I mean, I think it's cool also for parents to be big on saying, no, first you secure your primary career, right? You need a qualification in this, or you need experience in this, or you need an apprenticeship in this. And then once you've secured that, we'll support you to go and fanny about and explore what your other hobbies are and your other creative pursuits if you have any. You know, maybe you want to be a football player, maybe you want to be a boxer, maybe you want to be a film director, whatever it is. And that's cool as well, you know. It was just lucky for me the way it kind of lined up, because I dealt with a lot of difficulties, but also had a lot of opportunities. And one thing I would say to my credit has been the consistency of my passion to create things that have a message. You know, if you go back and listen, I love every subsequent wave of hip hop and grind that's come after when I was younger and when I was very much at the vanguard of this culture. I love it, right? I love it, but it's no got the same kind of content that I had at that age. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
At 18, 19 years old, I was writing radical political music, you know, that had a message that was designed to be a soundtrack for the activists who were trying to fight for change, who were trying to get out in the streets and do this, that and the next thing. So it always had a purpose. It was a bit more than I need to get my face out there. It was a bit more than I need to be seen as the best rapper or the best battle rapper. And I had a stint of being all these things as well. It was for me, ultimately, I had a message to carry. And that's the one thing that's consistent between every bit of content that I create, every bit of output that I have, every prong, and what I'm doing. There's that continuity of message. I have something, not necessarily that I want to say, but that I think needs to be said.
It's a point that can make a difference, and you follow.
Hopefully.
You know, when you follow your passion like that's also where the best content is created. When you follow on your heart and your gut and you're saying, this is what I want to talk about. That's actually the whole reason why this podcast started, because I was terrified speaking on a microphone. Like, see the idea of talking to you now. If you told me 2 years ago I'd be doing this, I'd be like, absolutely zero chance I'd be doing this. But it was through a lot of seeing things that went right and seeing a billion podcasts, seeing very little people in wheelchairs talking, and noticing that, you know, when I was younger, you just, you know, I've been very fortunate really throughout my life to have a lot of family and not been particularly poor at any point. So I can't have any complaints that way. But I would say that being in the chair and not having like talking to your pals and not watching TV and sports, everything in it, politics, and not seeing any sort of representation in any kind of way, kind of leaves you feeling what's the best word? Excluded basically from society.
Yeah.
So you grow up with this massive chip on your shoulder. And for me, that turned into a lot of anxiety, depression, borderline alcoholism, kind of a. Yeah. I mean, I didn't get there, but I knew that I was going that way. I was 16, going to bars and stuff myself. So it was,
You've been in the chair all your life?
Yes, right. Yeah. And so that...
How have you found society to become more accommodating? Or, I mean, what sort of change have you noticed in your lifetime in terms of like accommodating people with your kind of disability?
Well, what I've noticed is there's a lot more talking, but it rarely ever actually manifests itself into actual sustainable action that's going to make a difference. And that's where I eventually was like, oh, wait a minute, if these issues that I feel are going to ever be addressed, I'm going to need to try and do something about it. Like you said before, any difference that's ever been made has been from somebody fighting for something. Yeah. And, we live in a world where all the technology in the world, all the, we've got everything close by to us, in the sense of we don't have to think about things that people have had to in the past with wars and things like that. But we're still living in an age where we're excluding people from society through inaccessibility and not allowing. Yeah. Because I'll give you an example, right? With the clubs and stuff opening back up, and a lot of people might not look at this as a major issue, but if you really think about it, it does have a big impact in terms of how people are viewed in society. So with the clubs and the bars opening back up, one thing that I remember really is that people would text you, message you, like, you're coming out tonight to go to Firewater or whatever, and then you realise that no, that's got 2 flights of stairs down to it. These clubs and bars that people would love to go to, you have no access to at any point, and so right away in terms of the social circle, you're right out of the picture.
I think that's where this concept of privilege is far more easily applied, and is less contentious than it is sometimes where it's applied in other ways. Like a middle class female academic telling a working class guy who's just out of jail he's privileged because he's male. And it's like, in a sense, you're right, but there might be a cleverer way to frame it so that he doesn't turn around and go, what are you talking about privilege? Do you know what I mean? You're fucking, do you know what I mean? Because I think, like, if you look at it like this, privilege is me being able to get up in the morning and not have to think about how do I move from my bed to the toilet and how do I move down the stairs, and operating the whole day for days on end on my whole life without considering it. By the time I'm going out the door, somebody who uses a wheelchair is still trying to get ready, and that being a kind of an analogy of how society is kind of created. In a sense, it's created mostly for people who get up and walk about and just they kind of things. And so when people who don't face the kind of challenges that you face are in charge of everything, the society begins to manifest a reflection of what their tastes and preferences and needs are. And this is cultural, this is structural, and so that's why then people like yourself have to kind of use a lot more energy than probably you can afford to use, just try to get basic dignity and basic respect and basic understanding. That's what I think the privilege term really, really becomes an undeniable fact,
Yeah, I mean 100%. I think that's something that, even in my level of disability, there's things I take for granted that people can't do as well that I can do. So there's always a level to it, but you're totally right in the sense of there's always extra. And that's why when you're talking about the need to have more energy and do these things differently just to maintain a level of dignity, I think that's one of the reasons why I and many people in wheelchairs or many people with disabilities in general can fall so far so fast, because when I stop going to the gym, or I don't eat so well for a few weeks and put on a bit of weight, all of a sudden you lose a bit of muscle and you kind of get in the chair as easily, and it's more difficult to go to the toilet and all, so you start to, because you're doing this, your opinion of yourself goes down, because you feel like you're self-inflicting it, because everybody's saying these things are dead easy. How are you struggling with this?
Yeah.
So it's always a constant. You're able to, basically, the self-humiliation in a way is a lot easier to experience in a quicker fashion.
Yeah.
So that is why I'm so active, and that's why doing this sort of thing, and why I started doing it, was to highlight the fact that we as disabled people, in a sense, need to be able to maximise what we have, and I think a lot of the conversation we're almost encouraged not to do that. We're encouraged to just be, that happy-go-lucky, special, inspirational image.
Yeah.
It's not true, really. It's
because that's convenient for people who are living with disabilities every day. It's convenient for them to know that. It's the same as the kind of, the rags to rich story, or there's also many tropes. It's all about so that we can all put our head in the pillow at night and think, the world's in a good place.
Exactly.
Keep these people in the margins, and I don't have to be confronted.
But that's it. See, instead of, because what they're really doing, instead of confronting the issues and making a change, they're saying that, well, these people are special. Look at them. Look at these athletes, or look at these Paralympians. They're so amazing. Anyway, it doesn't matter if the train doesn't have a ramp into it. Who cares? Let's move on. Do you know what I mean?
It doesn't matter if thousands of people with disabilities have committed suicide because of welfare reform.
Exactly.
Or tried to commit suicide because of welfare reform.
Do you know how many people I know that haven't left their house in like over a year almost because of this?
Yeah.
And from personal assistance to care in general, everything has just stopped.
Yeah.
And the government have really, from what I know and what I've seen, they have really let down disabled people, and the whole chat around this virus, as if it's like the only people that it affects are older people and disabled people.
Yeah.
See, when you're like in your 20s and you're in a wheelchair, and you hear people say it's only disabled people that affects, you're like, well, hold on a minute, like, what does that even mean?
The government is primarily concerned with advancing or protecting the interests of the top 20% of the income distribution, right? In a pandemic or not in a pandemic. The logic of that is if they can get those people to continue to vote for them, then they can carry out other areas of their agenda, right? So that's the whole logic behind that. But the downside of that is anybody who doesn't fall into that bracket, they have a harder time of it, trying to get their issue onto a political agenda. And obviously, the further down the social scale you go, obviously people who have, sit on a spectrum in terms of what their mobility needs are, or their disabilities, and what this allows and disallows them to do or participate in, not as a reflection of them, often a reflection of the limitations of the society, then they become marginalised politically as well. Political, I call it political exclusion. It's not marginalisation. We know it's happening and we don't do anything about it. So it's 100%. Active political exclusion. I always use Grenfell Tower as an example. You had people in that tower who for years were trying to warn the council and the factors and everybody, our electricity in this building's fucked. Like, something's going to go on fire, and and there's going to be a tragedy here before you listen to us. Years and years they persisted with that. No one listened. They got ignored. Why? Because a lot of them are ethnic minorities. A lot of them are, in a kind of gadget rental market or social housing tenants. And, there's a lower premium on that kind of life than there is in the lives of the people in the surrounding Notting Hill area who probably, thought the cladding was nice to look at for a distance. There's a lesson in that, apart from the obvious ones about fire safety, but a deeper lesson about political exclusion, which is the people, the corrupt agencies and organisations that took the money-saving decisions to clad that building and make it a fire trap. They had more political access to the local power structures than the people who lived in that building. And that's a topsy-turvy way to organise a society.
I mean, it's there's so many things to unpack with it, but going back to the actual, when we're talking about the groups and disabilities, see, when you look at the actual group of disabilities as a whole, we're the largest minority in the world, right? But something that I've realised from my own life and seeing other people with it as well is that you're almost brought up to not speak out and kind of be happy with what your situation is.
Yeah.
Even although you know it's a bit messed up how you can't go.
Because they're not locking you away in an asylum or something.
Yeah. So it's like you're kind of a free, but in your head you're thinking, well, actually, so the reason why I feel like, we as a group could all really make a difference because of the fact that we have such a big minority. But the fact is that as individuals, generally, we are shunned in the sense of from a young. I'm talking maybe people that are born disabled, right? You're brought up to not really want to speak out or need to until you experience it enough in your life to go, hold on a minute, this is out of order. And then even people that, if somebody's can walk and is not disabled and then they get hit by a bus and they're in a wheelchair, it's like their life's over. It's like this is the most catastrophic thing. How many movies have you seen where the role for a person in a wheelchair is...
It's a great point. It's a great point. And that's a really great point. And that's that's why it's dead important to hear from people who experience things, because they have a way of conveying things that really is, that makes people understand in a way that somebody, a campaigner or an advocate who doesn't deal with disability but who works on behalf of people might not be able to put across. You're absolutely right. I mean, there's a whole cottage industry of films and content, and it's all about somebody becoming disabled and how it's such a waste. Do you know what I mean? How it's such a tragedy.
Yeah.
But you've got people who are born, with different conditions or physical mobility issues, and that's how they live. And that's not quite as sexy, is it? As somebody getting hit by a bus on a film.
Exactly. And that's why that kind of part of it doesn't, the people that we don't get talked about, we don't get any sort of coverage or any sort of discussion around that. It's all just like, oh, that's really, the mainstream thought still in this day and age still is, that's a shame. That's really sad. When in reality, as a society, we have the chance and the ability to change that. It's not something that has to be like this. It's just a case of how are we going to start to move the needle here? So this is why I decided to start actually trying to speak up about stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean, today more than ever, we have the technological ability, we have the scientific understanding, we have the medical understanding. Billionaires are launching themselves into space now. The resources exist on this planet. It's really bizarre, isn't it? It's really bizarre. Like, it's just, it's a shame because we're at a point now, and this is more just a general point about inequality. When you grow up in dysfunction, say you grow up in a violent community, right? You become adjusted to the rhythms of a violent community, right? You violence becomes like a language that's been communicated and interpreted. It's not always an explosive physical act. It's just something that you're kind of aware of, right? But if you took somebody who was living in a non-violent community where they felt safe and secure and you put them in there, they'd be like, phone the police. And I think society is in a place where we've become so adjusted to the vulgarity of the inequality that to hear someone actually point out, I'm all for space exploration, but I'm not really for a billionaire, a multi-billionaire who has more money than one human mind can actually comprehend and more money than he will ever be able to spend, while people are struggling during a pandemic for basic dignity, whether it be people with disabilities, whether it be other minority groups, and workers' rights and yada yada. And so there's something kind of cliche now about pointing out. It's terribly unfashionable to point out. It's almost like you're kind of harking back to the sort of the Tony Benn days, and and it's a bit cooler to sort of skip around the point and talk about other things and jargon, and really it's just a dead fundamental basic point. Like, Jeff Bezos blasting himself into space, or Richard Branson, the tax avoiding person who wanted the government to bail out his company, blasting himself into space. It's the equivalent of somebody coming to your lung cancer screening and lighting up a cigarette. Do you know what I mean? And blowing smoke in your face. It is though, isn't it? It is though. I mean, it's so sociopathic. It's like, read the room. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Read the fucking room.
Yeah.
And
the timing of it is so,
instead we've got the media celebrating it, you know, and I include some of the media that I work for. You know, you get the media, it's like, oh wow, big news story, Jeff Bezos, and he's kind of thank every Amazon worker who's pissing in a bottle before collapsing at the wheel of their car and crashing and dying of exhaustion because they're frightened I'll sack them. Thank you, you paid for this. Fucking right, some of them paid for it. You know what I mean? Like, it is shocking, and in the future, humans will look back at this and they'll look back less fondly on us than we look back at the Romans. You know what I mean? We'll look back at the Romans and be like, you did some cool shit, you know, some cool fucking advances, you know, the roads and all that. Cheers. They're going to look back at this time and they're going to be like, wow, man, like, you've really degenerated into a whole other species. You know what I mean? Because I just think, like, we knew actually have the world falling down around us. You know what I mean? And still we're kind of induced into this fantasy that somebody like Boris Johnson's or Jeff Bezos is going to figure it out, you know, and we could just get on with being good little worker ants.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much things. I think the actual example of the billionaires is the clearest thing you could state that shows the inequality. Is especially, like you said, the timing of it during the pandemic with everything going on. It shows how detached they are and how far we're fallen, I guess, as a community.
And then, but I also have this other view as well. You kind of, in a sense, we kind of get what we deserve. And this is this is a more vengeful side of my nature. This is a more cynical side of my nature that I'm always in a battle with. But I look at us from a distance. I look at me. I look at us as a mass of people. And I look at even people who consider themselves radical and informed are constantly being re-induced into the fantasy. You know, the fantasy that this is a functional society, that this is a progressive society, and in some ways it is, but it's always kind of nested in this little bubble of this society where we have some freedoms and we have some liberties and we can post shit on Facebook and Twitter and all that. We're running out of avenues where we can actually do anything that's not really about an economic transaction of some kind. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? And we start to see ourselves as products. And I remember one day I'm sitting on the couch and my kids are doing something funny and there's a part of my brain like, this will make great content. And then I'm like, what? What's happened to me? Am I becoming part of the algorithm?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're sort of like, everything has to be extracted for entertainment or for creating prestige or, you know, value in some way.
So when you're saying we get what we deserve, what you're saying is that we are not seeing the reality of the situation?
Well, you know, there are examples of people rising up and fucking putting people to the guillotine. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. People just going like, do you know what? Fuck this, right? Let me eat what? Guillotine, right? You know. Are you the cousin that was fucking that other family member? You're going in the fucking guillotine and all, right? You bunch of dirty bastards. How do you like that? Right? Play the national anthem. And I don't know if that's possible now, and I'm not necessarily advocating violence, but you don't really get the sort of change that we need by constantly deferring to the people who have been in charge as society has degenerated into climate destruction, mass inequality. And I'm not just talking about the inequality that we have in this part of the world, but you have most of the world that's not even been vaccinated yet. Yeah. Well, Jeff Bezos is blasting himself into space. He's got enough money for everybody to be vaccinated. I mean, it's just, but as I say, we're so adjusted to it. We're so adjusted to it that nobody's kind of thinking on those lines of, like, what would it take, really? And then the thing is, I know, and I'm a hypocrite these days, do you know what I mean? Like, and I'll have to kind of wrap this up soon, but one of the things I struggle with is, you know, Loki, this character, you know what I mean? It's me, but it's a persona. And there's a lot of things tied up in that I see is essential to my identity, you know? And one of them is, fuck the system, you know? One of them is, tear it all down, burn it all down. I'll light the match. And now I'm 38 years old, I have 2 children. I work for newspapers that I used to publicly call out. I start a company. I'm very much being subsumed by the system in a sense, you know what I mean? Because when you go through what I went through with the success that I had, it sets you on this path. Before you know it, you're starting to become part of a machine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's not as easy to turn around. You've got a seat at the table, so it's not as easy to flip the table upside down and go, well, fuck you, guillotine this cunt. Do you know what I mean? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And you have to be a bit smarter, and so you're kind of moderated in a way. You know what I mean? You've got to be a bit more strategic. And you do, and I'm saying this honestly because it's important, you do make concessions, you do sell out a wee bit, because you think, right, this is going to guarantee, especially with children, because then it's about their security. And I'm all for the community, but I'll eat your Wayne if it saves my Wayne. And I mean that metaphorically, obviously, but that's the truth. You know, I'm there's this, if it's my Wayne or your Wayne, it's no question. And that's a deeply conservative, it's a deeply extreme conservative attitude, right? So that new instinct kicks in. And I think that's one of the strategic challenges for anybody who wants to change the system. It works enough for enough people that what you need to do is make those people understand how it doesn't work for these people. Because you can't guillotine everybody, obviously.
Well,
You know what I mean?
I think that really summarised it really well there, to be fair. And
I hope the Daily Mail doesn't see this.
but listen, it was nice to speak to you before you get cancelled. And
For the second time. No worries, great to talk to you, mate.
This was. I hope you enjoyed it, man. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Always, always. Good hearing about your experiences as well. You know, sort of I feel a wee bit more informed about some stuff. So thank you for that.
It means a lot to come for you, and I think that I'm trying to make it as different as possible, and I'm happy to have you on. So thank you very much.
No worries. Cheers.